The book of 1 Peter tonight, chapter 3. I don't know how long or short I'll be tonight with this. I wrote this message years ago when I was a young man, when I thought I knew everything about marriage, but I really didn't know anything. And I got to be honest with you. I'm married 50 years this month. Joni and I are. Thank you. And I still don't think I know a whole lot. Anytime you think you've arrived or you've learned it all, you've not yet begun. But boy, I was going over these passages today, and it's amazing what age and years will do. Because as I was going over this passage and then looking at this outline, looking at this message and how I saw it then in my 20s, I not only saw some differences in these passages, but I saw a lot of wasted words in this outline. I'll just be honest with you. But I believe it's the message for tonight. So I don't know, it may not take me very long. And really a sermon's not about time. It's about truth. And it's not about just speaking it. It's about touching you. And so my heart tonight is that this will touch you. It will touch you. Even as it touched me today. And so what I want you to do is read with me these verses, and then I'm going to lay a little bit of foundation. I'm going to break this passage down for you and show you what the Lord showed me a long time ago. But I think I see it in a clearer way tonight than I've ever seen it. 1 Peter chapter 3, likewise ye wives. And now he mentions the husbands down in verse 7. So this is the marital relationship. Likewise ye wives, be in subjection to your own husbands, that if any obey not the word, in other words, it could be they're not saved or they're just not right with God. Maybe they're not in church. Maybe they're not walking in step with you, dear wife. They also may be won without the word, although they also may, without the word, be won by the conversation. And that word conversation means manner of life. It's not talking about speech or talk, but manner of life. And not just your actions, but your spirit. And probably your spirit's even more important than your actions. While they behold your chaste, that means holy, conversation, manner of life, coupled with fear. Who's adorning, and of course that word adorn talks about putting on. It conveys the idea of putting on a garment. But we'll get into that here in just a minute. Let it not be outward adorning of the plaiting of hair, or the wearing of gold, or the putting on of apparel. You're not going to win your husband to Christ. You're not going to bring your husband back to the Lord by a physical appeal. That's what he's simply saying there. It's going to have to be by a spiritual appeal. But, and here he goes to talk about it, but let it be the hidden man, not the outer man, but the inner man. The hidden man of the heart, and that which is not corruptible, even the ornament of a meek and a quiet spirit, which is in the sight of God of great price. For after this manner in old time, boy, if it was old time in Peter's day, it's certainly old time in our day. The holy women also who trusted in God adorned themselves, being in subjection unto their own husbands. Even as Sarah obeyed Abraham, and I mentioned this yesterday, calling him Lord. Now, I'm not preaching that you wives ought to go around calling your husband Lord. That's not what I'm saying. But he is magnifying the spirit of subjection here, is what he's doing. whose daughters ye are, as long as ye do well, and are not afraid with any amazement. In other words, you don't let fear keep you from doing what God tells you to do. The fear of the repercussions. Look what he goes on to say. Likewise, connects this verse with the previous 6. Ye husbands, dwell with them according to knowledge, giving honor unto the wife, as unto the weaker vessel, and as being heirs together of the grace of life, that your prayers be not hindered. I'm going to talk to you tonight from my heart. Everything I've preached Sunday morning, Sunday night, Sunday school, everything I've preached so far on the family, the marital relationship, the Christian home, and the Christian family has been preached supposing that the husband and wives and the families that I am preaching to are both saved. Not only both saved, but both right with God, and rightfully so. And the things that we preached to you and tried to teach you yesterday, they certainly apply to that scenario. But I believe you understand as well as I do that that's not always the case even in churches. It's a given that that's true out in the world, but even in churches, and I'm finding that this is becoming less a minority all the time. Matter of fact, in some places and in some churches, it's becoming a majority. There's a lot of churches I preach in where more times than men without their wives, I see a lot of wives without their men in church. And I think that's why he dedicates 6 verses to the wives and 1 verse to the man. A lot of churches I go into, and I know sometimes men can have a sort of a superioristic attitude. But I'll tell you, I want to thank God for the women in our churches. Because a lot of churches I go in, if it wasn't for the women, there wouldn't be much of a church. And I'm not saying that to diss the men, because I've seen churches where it's even different than that. Just the opposite. But there are a lot of churches and a lot of Christian homes and families that are split, that are not together. Wives coming without their husbands because their husbands either aren't saved or their husbands have fallen into sin and wandered away from God. Then on a more of a minority basis, I see some men coming to church whose wives don't come with them, whose wives either are not saved or perhaps they have allowed something to come into their life. They have allowed Satan or the world to distract them, and therefore daddy will come and mama won't, and vice versa. We call that a split home spiritually, a split home. And can I say, dearly beloved, really, I'll be honest with you, while it hurts the husband and wife, I'll tell you who it hurts more than anybody. It hurts the children. It hurts the children in that home, and it'll hurt the children in that church too. And ultimately it does hurt the church because it keeps the church from assuming the place and position and the plateau that God has intended for it. With that in mind, dearly beloved, I want to approach these verses because that is exactly the subject that Simon Peter is dealing with, and it somewhat gratifies my heart, not that it existed, but this is not just a trait for today. This is a problem and this is a situation that has existed all the way back to the beginning of the New Testament church. So the question must be asked, what do we do? How do we handle this? How do we approach this? And that's where we find ourselves in these verses tonight. And I feel led of the Lord to deal with these situations, because I can't tell you how many times in my ministry as a pastor, and I pastored for 37 years, I pastored the Cherokee Baptist Church right over here in Rusk, Texas, right on the hill next to the hospital. Cherokee Baptist Church. I was 23 years old. I probably wasn't much of a pastor. I'm still not much of anything. But I was so wet behind the ears, they had to follow me with a rain bucket. I stayed there 8 months. I think, Chad, that was more about me just wanting to preach than it was the will of God. I'll be honest with you. Then a church opened up in Carthage, Texas. It was Panola Baptist Temple. We changed it to Open Door Baptist Church. I told Chad today when I went in there, I thought I was walking into Jerusalem, and I found myself slap dab in the middle of Corinth. For 5 years, I fought the beast of Panola County. And finally, the Lord let me go home. Didn't know my daddy was dying. A year and a half after I went home, my daddy died, and I became the pastor of the church I grew up in for 31 years. So for 37 years, I pastored, and I can't tell you how many times I had a man come to me who was having problems with his wife spiritually, problems in their marriage, problems maybe with her coming to church. I said, "Preacher, what should I do?" And even more times, and I think any pastor will tell you this, I had wives come to me who were having problems with their husband coming to church, or problems with their husband in their marriage, in their home, and they're all united. They're all basically tied together. And again, the question was, "Preacher, what do I do?" Now, I believe these verses give us a good answer, but I want to make it very plain to you tonight. Just like if you raise your children right and do right, that's no guarantee that your children are going to turn out right. I mean, it'll certainly set the foundation. It'll certainly make it a possibility, but know this: the choice will be theirs. Ultimately, they come to an age of accountability, and they come to a place where they have to make a choice. God is not in this forced Christianity, this arm and hammer Christianity. God wants us not only to be saved through our free will and choice. I'm not a Calvinist. God wants us to serve Him through our free will and choice. Now, there's one thing for sure about that. If we make the wrong choice, we'll be sorry one day, because we'll have to give an account. But nonetheless, God's not in pushing, He's in leading. He's in leading. Now, I can't tell you that if you do everything that I'm about to show you, or let me say that a better way than what I just said it, about the way the Bible's going to show us. If you do everything in here that I'm going to try to tell you tonight, I can't tell you your husband or wife is going to get right. I mean, folks, it's not a magic wand. It's not a sheet of paper with a secret on it. It's not a formula or a checklist where you go, ta-toot, 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 bang, it's going to happen. I'm sorry. It doesn't work that way. Because there's this old thing called the human will that can get right in the way of it. And every person, boy or girl, man or woman, must make their own choice to be saved. And every person, man or woman, must make their own choice to have a good marriage and to serve God and to raise their family accordingly. It's an open choice. But I want you to examine these verses with me, and I want to give you some things to think about. And basically, I want to break this text down into two different parts. and tell you this, and the title of this message, and I wrote this, ooh, goodness. I wrote this back in the 80s. And I'm not even going to use 3/4 of it. I got to reading through it today, and I thought, why'd you say that? Why did you write that down? You're like the Pharisees. You think you'll be heard for your much speaking. So I basically want to break it down into 2 parts, and I want to answer this question: how do you save a split home? How do you save a split home? We're talking about the Christian home. We're talking about the Christian family. I'd venture to say that the scenarios I just described are probably right here in this church tonight, because they're in every church I go into. And it basically involves 2 things. And I want you to notice in verse 1 of chapter 3, it says likewise. Likewise, the word likewise there connects the previous verses in context to the following verses that come after verse 1. And so that those verses that are connected in context are chapter 2, verses 21 through verse 25 to the end of the chapter. And then he says, likewise. So here it is. Number 1, how do you save a split home? Well, number 1, you follow Christ's example. That's always a good idea. I've seen those people wearing those bracelets. I don't wear one. I'm a man, and maybe this is arrogant, proud statement. Maybe this is just a masculine statement. I don't wear bracelets. And I don't wear necklaces, okay? Now, that's just me. Let it go in one ear and out the other. If I just offended you, please forgive me. I'm sorry. I mean it. But I'm still not going to wear a bracelet or a necklace. What would Jesus do? That's the name of the bracelet. What would Jesus do? Well, that is exactly the content of this paragraph. What would Jesus do? Notice what Simon Peter says here. He says in verse 21, for even hitherunto were ye called, because Christ also suffered for us. And notice this phrase, leaving us an example. And then it leads right into the split home. The context of these verses likewise leads right into the split home. A home where the wife's serving God and the husband isn't. The home where the husband's serving God and the wife isn't. So we need to follow Christ's example. But the second thing I want to deal with tonight is this. We need to focus our efforts. Focus our efforts. Now, I'm not just going to pick out a certain phrase in verses 1 through 7 of 1 Peter chapter 3, but in the first 6 verses, he's talking about the efforts of the wife to salvage this situation. And in the 7th verse, he's talking about the efforts of the husband to salvage this situation. By the way, if you and your wife are on the same page and you both love Jesus and you both are serving God together, don't take that for granted. Don't get proud about it. Thank God for it and stay humble and stay in love one with another. And spend time together and spend time with Jesus. And realize it can change in a minute if you take your eyes off Jesus Christ. The whole key to this is your relationship with the Lord. So here it is. To save a split home, we must follow Christ's example and we must focus our efforts. Now, what is it about Christ's example that we need to follow? I want to say, first of all, his example was an example of sinlessness. Sinlessness. Now, I know that we're not Jesus and we'll never be sinless till we see him. I love John's word. It's in 1 John chapter 3. It doth not yet appear what we shall be, but we know that when we shall see him, we shall be like him. Glory be to God. And then Jude said he's going to present us faultless before the Father. I'm not there yet, neither are you, but we're getting there. To God be the glory. And yet we ought to want to be. And yet we ought to strive to be, and especially in this subject that I'm dealing with tonight. If you want to save your split home, if you want to win your lost husband, your husband that is errant, or your lost wife, or your husband, or your wife that is errant, know this, that you need to follow Christ's example, and that first of all involves living a life above reproach, living a life where he or she cannot point their finger at you and say, I thought you were a Christian, I thought you loved Jesus. We need to strive to live our lives, in such a way where it sets an example for the other. But not only in following his example do we find his example one of sinlessness, but we find it as one of selflessness. I touched on this yesterday just a minute, but look at verse 23. Who when he was reviled, in other words, they mistreated him, they abused him. Brother, there is a lot of mistreatment that goes on in the home, especially a husband with a wife. There are a lot of men that take advantage of the fact that they're a man and the position that they have. And there are abuses. And I'm not talking about with your fist and hands. I'm talking about with your words, your attitude, and your spirit. But Jesus set an example of selflessness. And boy, I'm going to tell you something. If your marriage is going to be a success, that's what it's going to. It's not only going to take sinlessness, in other words, trying to be pure, trying to live a holy life by the grace of God, but it's going to take selflessness. Nobody set that example any greater than Jesus did. When Jesus took of himself no reputation, but took upon him the form of servant and was made in the likeness of sinful men. Who when he's reviled, he reviled not again. He didn't do what was natural in the human realm. When he suffered, he threatened not. He didn't strike back, but committed himself to him that judgeth righteously. And boy, that is living the Christian life. We need to learn to leave it all with Jesus. We need to learn what Simon Peter said in his first epistle in chapter 5, and that is to cast all your care upon him because you know he cares for you. Christ not only set an example of sinlessness and selflessness, but he set an example of sacrifice. Boy, look what he says here. Who his own self, verse 24, bare our sins in his own body on the tree, that we being dead to sins, and he uses the word sins. He's not talking to a sinner. He's talking to Christian. A sinner is guilty of sin, but it's a saved person that commits sins, plural. Should live unto righteousness, by whose stripes ye are healed. The example of sacrifice. I'm going to tell you, if you're going to live for Jesus every day, you know where you got to live? At the cross. You see, you come to the cross for salvation, but you live at the cross for sanctification. The blood is the instrument of justification, but the cross is the instrument of sanctification. That's why Paul said in Romans 12, he said very clearly, I beseech ye therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that ye present your bodies, the whole man, not just the physical body, but body, soul, and spirit. You present your bodies a living sacrifice. That means for a lifetime. That means every day. Holy and acceptable unto God, which is your reasonable service. And who can forget Galatians chapter 2 and verse 20? Here's how Paul lived his life. I am crucified with Christ. Nevertheless I live, yet not I, but Christ liveth in me, listen now, and the life that I now live, I'm not living like I did before I got saved. I'm not only not living like I did before I got saved, I'm not living like I did when I was first saved. I'm in a constant state of evolvement and growth. If you're not growing, you're spiritually sick. Something is wrong. He said very clearly, the life that I now live, I live by the faith of the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. So if you're going to save a split home, you must follow Christ's example. You can't do this. Your thoughts and your wisdom will fall flat on its face. You and I can do nothing without him. If we're going to do this, if we're going to see this through and become a reality in our life, it's got to be through the indwelling power of a resurrected Savior living inside of us. Then number two, boy, this ain't going to last long. I don't care. You know what I hope lasts longer than the sermon? You know what I really hope lasts long? Not the sermon, but the effect it has on you. On me. Believe me, I'm preaching to me tonight. I hope you're getting something out of this, because I'm sure getting something out of it, because I sat down and read these notes this evening. And the Lord let me just see it in a different way. I guess that's what 50 years of being an idiot will do for you. That's what it'll do for you. But not only must we follow Christ's example, we must focus our efforts. We must focus our efforts. In verses 1 through 6 of chapter 3, he talks about the efforts of the wife, trying to win, and I use that word because that's the word he uses in verse number 1. Trying to win her husband, whether he be lost or whether he just be errant. He uses the word won. In the first 6 verses magnify the efforts of the Christian wife, the wife who is walking with God, who is trying to teach her children to pray with them and read her Bible to them and to walk with God. All these 6 verses magnify the necessary efforts, the necessary components that are involved in winning him. And then you come to verse number 7. Verse number 7, I think I've already said this. It's interesting to me that he dedicates 6 verses to the saved wife and 1 to the saved man. It's probably because there's a lot more wives that come to church, especially in our day, maybe even Peter's day, that come to church without their husbands than vice versa. And not only that, because of the different place they have in God's pecking order and place in the home. Now, where should a wife focus her efforts? Well, she needs to focus her efforts in the area of submission. In the area of submission. The word he uses here, the synonym he uses for submission is subjection. It's subjection. The word subjection is the Greek word hupotasso. It's a military term. I think I mentioned this yesterday, and it literally means to place yourself under rank or to put under. And I'm here to tell you, human nature does not want to do that. It takes divine nature to humble ourselves, submit ourselves, and subject ourselves, whether it be to the Lord or whether it be to those authorities that are over us. And I'm not just talking about husbands, but even other authorities, governing authorities, police, and things of that nature. It takes the Spirit of grace and the power of the grace of God within you and I to subject ourselves. He uses the word subjection in verse number 1. And he uses the word subjection in verse number 5. So the efforts of the wife must be focused towards subjection or submission. The efforts of the husband must be focused towards consideration. I mean, when you read verse number 7, the whole gist of that verse, fellas, is simply this: you need to be considerate toward your wife. You need to stop just thinking about yourself and pleasing yourself, and you need to get down off that pedestal and put her in the rightful place in your life that God meant for her to be, and you need to be considerate toward her. In other words, you need to think more of her than you think of yourself. Boy, we covered that last night when Paul told the church at Ephesus, man ought to love his wife like he loves his own body, for no man ever yet hated his own body, but nourisheth and cherisheth it. Hey, fellas, are you nourishing your wife tonight? And I'm talking about spiritually. Maritally, are you nourishing your wife tonight? Do you cherish and appreciate the gift that God has given you? If you think you're going to walk in the house and she's supposed to drop at your feet and call you master and go about serving you, if you have that kind of attitude, and perhaps maybe you ought to contemplate, maybe that's why she is struggling spiritually. But if you're going to win her to Christ or bring her back to God, you're going to have to love her, be considerate toward her. And he says it very clearly in verse number 7. Look, likewise, ye husbands, dwell with them according to knowledge, giving honor unto the wife as unto the weaker vessel, as being heirs together. She's not walking behind you. You're walking together, arm in arm, step by step. You want a happy home? You better listen to this. You want a Christian home? You want a Christian family? You want a church that is strong and vibrant because it's full of families that love Jesus Christ? Well, we better listen to what Peter is saying to these wives and to these husbands. Let me go back for a moment to the woman, just for a moment, to the wife. Ye wives, he uses that word in verse number 1. And as I said in verse number 1, in verse number 5, he magnifies the fact that the dominant element that he's trying to magnify here as far as her efforts is in the area of subjection or submission. Now, I want to show you why that's so important tonight in winning your lost husband or your errant husband. Number 1, it's important because submission is an obligation. In verse 1, when he says, be in subjection, that's a command. That is not a suggestion. That is not an option. In the Greek language and even here in the English language, he is writing a very clear and definite command. Ladies, don't try to understand it. Don't try to put a round peg in every hole. Don't try to make it all make sense. Just, we've got to learn, whether you're a man or a woman, we've got to learn that God is God and we're not. And that God always knows what he's talking about, and whether you and I understand it or not, you and I have got to learn how to trust him and just simply obey him, whether it makes sense, whether we think it'll work or not, whether or not, dearly beloved, it appeases our flesh. We need to come to the place where we just simply say what Jesus said when he said, if it be any other way, let it be. Nevertheless, let thy will be done and not mine. That's the Christian life. That's what it means to walk with God. Now, just because it's command, I want you to understand this. This doesn't mean that she is inferior to you. But what it means, rather, is that this is God's will for the order of the home, ladies. And Christ set the example by submitting his authority to that of his Father, even though they were equal. God, the Father, the Son, the Spirit is coexistent, co-equal, and co-eternal. And yet even with that, in that equality, he backed away, he stepped down and submitted himself to the authority of the Father. And that's the spirit in which Simon Peter is speaking here when he reveals to you and I that submission and subjection is an obligation. And you better understand that. You need to understand that if you're going to win an errant or a lost husband. It's an interesting observation he makes here. Look what he says. That if any obey not the word, talking about the husband, that they may also be won without the word. Without the word. And be won by the conversation. In other words, you're not going to win them. Whether they're lost or they're errant, you're not going to win them by preaching to them. Putting your finger in their face, giving them ultimatums. You're going to win them by submitting yourself with a meek and a quiet spirit. You're going to win them by the words of the old songwriter. Are you weary? Are you heavy-hearted? Tell it to Jesus. Tell it to Jesus. Are you grieving over joys departed? Tell it to Jesus alone. Submission is an obligation. Got a little bit ahead of myself because the second thing I want to say, submission is an opportunity. Opportunity to what? To win them. To win them. It not only is the vehicle and the means, but it presents an opportunity. That being said, I've had ladies in my church come back to me after I had this conversation with them and say, "Preacher, it's not working." You know, that's like saying a sinner comes, hears the gospel and doesn't get saved. Say the gospel's not working. What do you mean it's not working? It's the power of God unto salvation to everyone that believeth. What do you mean it's not working? It's always working. And the word is always working. Just because a sinner rejects Jesus Christ does not mean the gospel is not working. And just because your husband might reject your efforts to try to win him doesn't mean it's not working. Because as I told you before, choice comes into play. Every person, every individual. And this started, my friend, in the Garden of Gethsemane. It started before then when Satan made a choice in eternity past, and Eve made a choice, and Adam made a choice, and men and women are still making choices. But we don't do it because it's working. We do it because it's right. And there's one thing for sure, if it ever does work, if you ever do make that choice, it'll be because you obeyed God. It'll be because you obeyed God. Submission is an obligation. Submission is an opportunity. But I love this because verses 3 through 6 magnifies this. Submission is an ornament. It is an ornament. As a matter of fact, he uses that word in verse number 4. He says, "But let it be the hidden man of the heart, in that which is not corruptible, even the ornament." And what is an ornament? It is a thing of beauty. It is something that dresses up or enhances that upon which it rests. In the context of these verses, he not only uses the word ornament, but he uses the word adorn, and that literally means to put on. So let's connect these two together in this matter of saving a split home and a woman focusing her efforts on submission. Submission is an ornament that you put on, amen. It is a thing of beauty that you put on that will make an appeal not to the eye of your husband, but to the heart of your husband. It'll make an appeal, dearly beloved, in the sense that it won't draw him by virtue of the ornament itself, but it'll cause him to be ashamed of the lack in his own life of that very same beauty and that very same grace that God will use in your life to draw him to the Lord. And he makes a parallel here. Really, it's a contrast. You see, he's talking about two different approaches to the putting on of this ornament. He's talking about the outer man as opposed to the inner man, or vice versa. Notice what he says in verse number 3. Whose adorning, let it not be that outward adorning of the plaiting of the hair, of the wearing of gold, or the putting on of apparel, eye candy. It might impress. It might draw attention physically or visually, but it won't pierce the heart. It won't pierce the soul and have an effect on that husband spiritually. It won't open their eyes or bring them to the place where they can see that the need here in his life is not that which appeases the flesh, but the real reason why he has no peace and the real reason why he's miserable is not because you don't dress in the best dresses and wear the best jewelry, but the real reason why he's miserable is not you, it's him. There's a problem between him and God. There's a lacking. Maybe he's not saved and he doesn't know the Lord, or he's walked away from God, and the flesh and the world and the devil has gotten in between him and his relationship with Jesus Christ. I'm talking about submission being an ornament. And Peter makes it very plain and clear. There's two emphases. There's two places where you can emphasize the adorning of an ornament, either on the outer man or the inner man. And look what he goes on to say about the inner man. But let it be the hidden man of the heart, and that which is not corruptible, even the ornament of a meek and a quiet spirit, which is in the sight of God of great price. For after this manner in the old time, the holy women also who trusted in God adorned themselves. He's not emphasizing their clothes and their hair. Nothing wrong with those things. Dress up, lady. Fix your hair up. I'm all for that. Put on nice dress and put on nice jewelry, but that's not going to bring your husband back to God. That's not going to bring about the desire that you have for God to work in his life. That's not the appeal that's going to bring it to pass. He's going to have to see Jesus in you. He's going to have to see Christ in you. That no matter how bad he treats you, that you love him in spite of that. And that no matter what he does wrong, that you don't ought to change your demeanor or your attitude or your spirit. I was reading about St. Augustine. It's a book called The Confessions of St. Augustine. His mother was named Monica. Didn't know women back then had that name, but evidently they did. Monica won her husband, that's St. Augustine's father, to Christ shortly before he died. And this is what he said of her. She served the Lord with diligence and won him to Christ, preaching by her behavior, which made her amiable. It impressed him. It spoke to him. It brought conviction to his heart. Her beauty in Christ and holiness showed him his need and the sinfulness of his own heart. And ultimately, He said, it drew me to Christ. He was lost. She was saved. Let me take just a moment and show you some ornaments. There's 4 of them here. That as a Christian woman with a lost husband or a husband that is errant, that you need to apply, that you need to adorn your heart and life with. Number 1, the word chase. He says very clearly in verse number 2, chaste conversation, manner of life. The word chaste meaning innocent, modest, or clean. Be holy. Don't think that by applicating a little bit of the world to your life, it's going to make appeal to him because of his worldliness. You don't want to draw him to the world. You don't want that to be your appeal. You want it to be Christ. Amen. Live a holy life and walk in chastity. But not only chaste, there's the word meek. The word meek, look what he says. Even of a meek and a quiet spirit. The word meek means to be mild, to be gentle, to be humble. Boy, you remember the example of Christ? When they reviled, he reviled not again. When he suffered, he didn't threaten them. He didn't hang on the cross. And brother, when they were beating him with sticks and spitting on him, y'all don't know who I am, but I'm here to tell you what. I could call 10,000 angels out of heaven and destroy this place. Just in case you don't know who I am, you're going to pay one day. See, that's all flesh. I'm just simply saying, ladies, you're not going to accomplish a spiritual end through fleshly means. It'll never happen. But not only the word chaste and not only the word meek, here's another ornament. But quiet, to keep one's seat or place undisturbed, peaceable. When he wants to fight, don't fight. When he hurts you, don't hurt back. Paul said this to the church at Rome and the believers in Rome. He said this very clearly. He said, don't be overcome with evil, but overcome evil with good. For in doing so, thou shalt heap coals of fire upon their head. In other words, they'll get under conviction. And then there's the word not corruptible. It means undecaying, immortal, consistency, permanence, eternal. Let me move to the husband and I'm done. The efforts of the husband must be focused on consideration. Consideration. I want you to see 4 ways here in which a husband can show consideration with his wife. Number 1, in the physical realm. And I'm not talking about the physical relationship. He uses the word in verse 7, dwell with them, be with them. When you're not at work, you come home. You come home. You want to show consideration to your wife? You want to win your lost wife? You want to win your errant wife and one who maybe is running from God? You want to bring her back? Then let her know that it's more important to you to be with her than with anybody else. It's more important for you to be home than it is to be anywhere else. There are far too many absentee wives in our churches. There are many men in our churches and even preachers spend more time hunting and playing than they do praying with their wife and their family. Many preachers are so busy solving everybody else's problems, and I wrote this down, that they create their own. One survey revealed that the average husband and wife spend 37 minutes together a week in actual communication. Oh, I see it all the time. I go into restaurants with my wife, and I've seen many a time husbands and wives sitting there looking at that phone. Sometimes I wish we could have a Greek oompa party. They like to throw dishes on the ground to break. Give me your cell phones, I'll break them. I go into a restaurant and I watch them. They won't say a word to each other. They'll sit there and do that. Dwell with them is not just being in the same house, but it's being in the same heart. Dwelling with them. I wish I'd have known the weight of these things years ago. I messed up, failed so bad, sincere, but sincerely wrong. So many husbands and wives spend so much time away from each other, they don't know how to spend time with each other. They sit down and they have nothing to say. She's bone of your bone and flesh of your flesh. Consideration physically. Consideration intellectually. Look what he says. Dwell with them according to knowledge. It's the Greek word gnosis. It means to know in a great variety of applications. To be aware of, to feel, to perceive, to understand. You ought to know your wife so well, you ought to know her or dwell with her according to knowledge to the place to where you can know what's going on in her by just simply feeling her spirit or maybe the look on her face or feeling the weight of the burdens of life that are upon her. Just not just something that she says, but the way she even carries herself. Dwell with her according to knowledge. Get to know her. I've been married 50 years, and I would hope I would know by now when she's mad at me. I mean, my wife doesn't have to come up to me and tell me, I'm mad at you. I can just be a look on her face. It can be the way she's walking sometime. It can be the fact that there's no kisses and hugs. And by the way, that little girl right there has been a lot better than I've been. Well, she deserves a reward. And she's going to get one day. I fear what I will suffer at the judgment seat of Christ. Dwell with her. Consider her physically. Be there. Be there. Be present and counted for. Emotionally, know her. Or intellectually, know her. Emotionally, support her and prop her up. Quit criticizing her, knocking her down all the time and telling her about her faults. Who do you think you are? Deal with your own faults and allow the Holy Ghost to. By the way, Mama and Daddy, you listen to me. You listen to me, you young husbands and wives. Hear me tonight. It's not your job to change your wife and change your husband. You can't. And if they change for you, they're changing for the wrong reason. But I'll tell you, if they need changing, let God change them and learn how to take it to the throne of grace and pray about it and tell it to Jesus. I'm talking about building strong homes and building strong marriages in our churches. I'm talking about some of you women who come without your husband. This is how you're going to win him. Some of you men that come without your wife. This is how you win him if you ever do. And I'd never tell you that if you do these things, it's going to happen. But it's still right to do it because God says it. You consider her spiritually. Look at this. Not only emotionally, by giving honor unto her. Every once in a while, we drive, boy, my soul. We drive so many miles. I'm preaching somewhere 47 weeks out of the year. Now, the miles we drive I wouldn't even begin to count them up.
And every once in a while she'll drive for me. And I'll always know, and what she needs for me to do is brag on her. They need that, fellas. You scoundrels. You like to be bragged on. You like your ego stroked. Brag on them a little bit. And she'll say sometimes, did I do a good job? She ought not to have to ask me that question. I ought to tell her, boy, you sure did a good job. You're the best driver in Houston, Texas, and boy, that's a lot of drivers. Spiritually. Being heirs together of the grace of life. Enjoying God together. Winning those rewards together. Being heirs together. Looking forward one day. You know, when we get to heaven, we're not going to be husband and wife anymore. I don't know if I like that, but it's just true. It'll be a totally different relationship. We won't see it that way anymore. Because see, when we get to heaven, it's not going to be about me being the husband, her being the wife. It's going to be about Christ being the groom and us being the bride. Well, it went a lot longer than I intended tonight. I guess I had more to say than I thought. That's what I got to say. And I hope it helps the homes in this church. I hope it helps the husbands and wives in this church. I hope it bonds this church and brings it together. Now, you may be here together tonight and you needed to hear this. And whatever it is, you need to listen to God and you need to obey Him tonight with our heads bowed and eyes closed.